And Jack Frost nipping at your nose. Yuletide carols being sung by a choir, and folks dressed up like Eskimos. Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe will help to make the spirit bright. Tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight.
Beautiful. All right. Hey, wait to. I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready for Christmas, John. That's the juices are flowing. Santa Claus.
Flowing, baby.
Wow, what a year. What a year. Today is our last show of the year. I'm so excited. The gang is here. We had an amazing guest, and hopefully people will start signing on. And I know that we have a great tail following on the broadcast in the weeks to come afterwards. And very thankful for everything this year. Let me go to Llewelyn. Llewelyn, say hello. How are you today?
Hello, I'm very well. I'm so glad that we have Alex because, suddenly he's very timely as he's former governor, right? It's going to be the, am I right? No. Yes. It's going to be, and she's going to push electric vehicles, which I've pushed for many decades. Actually, I think they're all going so well now they don't need any pushing. Somehow the government tends to start pushing when it doesn't need to. I have that theory about it, but we'll talk about that later. All is well. We're all a little cheered because there is the prospect that we'll beat COVID-19 with the vaccine. We don't actually know that yet. We don't know whether this thing will mutate and cheat us. But right at the moment, there is a sense that the sun is going to rise next year. And it's been a dreadful year for most people. So we're looking forward enormously to that. And
right.
Vaccines, I think, should be celebrated. That science really got together so fast and did the equivalent of a moonshot, the equivalent of something fantastic in producing a vaccine in a fraction of the time it normally takes. It normally takes 5 to 10 years, and this has happened in 9 months. Bravo to the pharmaceutical companies.
Yep. Agreed. John, how are you today?
Happy to be here. Great day in Austin, Texas. My best EV is my golf cart, which I think if I take the regulator off, I could drive to Houston. It's happy to have Alex here to talk about the future of EVs. It's also happy to see a great innovation come in. It's not, everybody does not get a chance to see all of the great innovations that we have seen in our lifetime. So as we look at what COVID has done, how we have responded to COVID, everything from the vaccine to all of the new business models that are indeed developing, it's a good time to be alive, even in crisis. As we say, no crisis, no innovation. So it's happy to be here. I'm just trying to stay alive until I get my vaccine.
That's well said. And without further ado, we got Alex Keros. And Alex, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, and appreciate you guys having me. And my little tweak to what Llewelyn and John just described is, in the midst of all this, I got 2 young kids at home. I got essentially a 7-year-old and a girl and a 9-year-old boy. Like every other parent, sort of pulling your hair out, going, man, what do I do? And one of the things we went and purchased, which is turning out to be one of the fun purchases of 2020, to your point, John, is a 3D printer. And like in a world where you think about how much we learn in classrooms and, extracting that and allowing, my son to go explore and build things through, a very simple CAD program and then turn it into something real and walk out, look, Dad, look, I built this car. I think while a lot of us are ready to be done with a lot of these things, there are a lot of silver linings, a lot of ingenuity, a lot of new ways of parenting, a lot of new ways of learning, a lot of new ways of approaching it. So yeah, it's a good day. It's also good to be done with this year and see that sun shining, as you said, Llewelyn. But it's good to be here. Look forward to talking with you guys, shooting the breeze and exploring electrification and what my team's doing at GM to help that along.
Absolutely. We're so delighted you're here. And for those of you that don't know Alex happens to be currently the lead architect of the EV infrastructure teams at General Motors, and he'll get into that in more detail. Prior to this role, Alex was the chief, smart cities chief at Maven. He'll explain what Maven is. And then before that, he was a senior manager of public policy at GM. And prior to that, he was a manager, a senior project engineer. He's been at GM for a long time. Alex happens to be a Wolverine. He has an MBA and a Bachelor of Science in Resource Management and Environmental Policy from the University of Michigan. And we're delighted that he's here. So again, Alex, welcome.
Thanks.
And so let me get into the weekly news. So COVID-19 is definitely flaring back. They call it the Thanksgiving break aftermath. So, God knows what's going to happen with the Christmas break. The flare up is intense. Here in Texas, it's pretty intense. Right here in Hays County, where I am, and Travis County, where Austin is, pretty heavy. Today at the University of Texas State University in San Marcos. And the cases are going up dramatically, 1.5 million compared to last week, on the way up to 60,300,000, rounding it up, rounding it down. Lots of cases. The death toll is 300,000 now, Americans. Way too many. One too many is too many. The number keeps climbing up dramatically, 17,000 from last week. So all the trends are up, which is not good. But we talked about the vaccine and all the other things that are going on. So hopefully that will get better. God willing, cross all your fingers, light a candle, go to church, pray, all of the above. In terms of the economy, what the future looks like, the expectation of, the vaccine and the new administration, and the Dow and the stock market is up. It's been up the last 2 or 3 weeks, steady. Today is kind of hovering, it's slightly up in all the indexes. Price of crude oil is up 62 cents, which is good for the drillers. So Texas is in good shape. Lots of business, oil and gas business still in Texas. And then the price of gas, amazingly, in the greater Austin, still $1.62 per gallon. I don't know what the price is in Detroit, but it's basically 2 cents down from last week. Who would have ever thought that the price of gas, getting that, regular gasoline would be below $2, and for a long time it's been below $1.70 or $1.80. And then, jobs are, I think, moving in the right direction, even though there is a part of the economy that is not engaged, and it's being replaced by things like delivery and, DoorDash went public and it's trading at, a significant number in market cap, the charts, and delivery is one of the new gig economy mantras. So with that said, John, I'm going to go to you. Tell me, how are we finishing the year? What are your expectations? What can we take from 2020 into 2021?
First of all, this is the first time I would not welcome the new year in. I would say goodbye to the old year. For the year, it has been exhilaration and then tragedy. I mean, we have never seen so much mixture of the relationship between the people sciences and the sciences and the businesses. It's almost like watching a football game when you're right there on the goal line and you hope that your team will score, then all of a sudden it is snatched from you with a fumble. So we hope that the vaccine will take us all the way across the finish line. Because what we have now, whether it's the nightly news, whether it's the people on the street, there's this interesting mixture of greatness, looking forward to the future, and then the possibility of the vaccine. With the vaccine means that we need to stop our activity of wearing masks. Does it mean that I will never get the disease in the future? Just what does it mean? And then, of course, the lawyers are lining up to sue all of the people, if you look at the sports world, who participated during this crisis and caught the disease and et cetera. So I think it's the most interesting time, with the exception of war, perhaps, that I have seen in my life, in America. Because in addition to the exhilaration, you have the stock market that's booming. You have the poor whose lives are getting worse. We like to say that if you work hard, you can make a decent living. But what happens when the whole bicycle is taken out from under you? You cannot even go to work. So on the one hand, I look at the stock market, it's up, it's booming. And then you look at the news and you see people in bread lines as if war were going on. So you've got these two dichotomies that's happening. And finally, as we look to the future, as we mentioned before, look at all of the great business models that have come out of this. Look at all of the great creativity that has come out of this. So it's been an interesting year. And I'll just close by saying this. I watched my undergraduate school, the LSU Tigers, when all freshmen beat a Florida team. What exhilaration. Supposed to lose by 23. And then my PhD school, Northwestern University, will beat Ohio State this Saturday in the Big Ten. And I don't know where Michigan is. They're a disgrace to the Wolverine tradition. This is all I have to say.
Not go there.
Yeah, don't go there. It's painful.
Yeah. It's been a tough
Llewelyn,
Well, I'd like to endorse what John said, and not about the sports, because I don't follow it, of course, as you know, but certainly about what an extraordinary year and how much innovation there has been. But also it has been devastating for the poor, and it may leave scars which will be with us for a very long time, particularly what it has done to the education of the underprivileged who do not have Alex's genius, for example, in buying a 3D printer for his children. I think that's just stunning. That's very exciting. But they don't even have broadband, as we heard last week on this program, in Brownsville, where a very large segment of the underclass does not even have access to broadband. And I was talking to an African-American friend today who talked about people having to go to libraries to try to educate their children if they're allowed in, and sitting in the library trying to use a computer. So you have a problem here, which is that you're going to have a scarred generation. I think what we need to do is to have a kind of Marshall Plan for education, to find those that have been damaged by this year of unsettled education and really look after them and look out for them and overcome. Otherwise, if you don't learn when you should learn, you have a hole that you can't fill in. It's always there. And this is a terrible thing to do to an awful lot of young people. We haven't done it maliciously or viciously. It's happened because of the virus, but we should look to it as a really fundamental thing that has to be fixed and fixed quickly. On the upside, the innovation has been astounding, the leap forward in all kinds of things. We had a hugely active, creative surge going on anyway. Now I think it's accelerated. Things are going to be different in the future. They're going to be winners and losers. But overall, because of the technological success, there will be more winners, more concentration, for example, on medicine, on medical research, which is good for everyone. So like John, I see good and bad, glass half full, glass full. And I think that overall, we're going to come out of this strengthened and creative, and more relying on creativity and invention to go forward against problems that we all know exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alex, you have an interesting perspective. You work for one of the most iconic companies in the world. COVID, how you're dealing with it, what did it change? Anything you can share? The innovation, you work in a great segment of the company. What's your take on 2020? What do we take on 2020, 2021? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think for me personally, and obviously for a lot of folks, I would sort of characterize it by a year of intensity, right? I think whether it was COVID and learning in March that, hey, our worlds were going to be sort of flipped upside down. Like I said, with young kids at home, it sort of impacted me as, I got to cook, I got to be a teacher, I got to be a great employee, I got to be a good teammate, I got to be a good boss. All of those sorts of things wrapped up in one. And admittedly, I had the blessing of doing all of those, right? To the points previously made, there are folks who were losing their jobs and single family parents who didn't have the luxury of being home with their kids and had to figure out how to juggle those sorts of things. So I think from a General Motors point of view, in my spot in it, obviously working from home and can we be productive and can my team be productive in that space was on our mind as much as we were concerned about our welfares. At the same time, while I wasn't directly involved, I think there's a huge sense of pride of being able to support the causes, whether it was generating masks, working with partners to get ventilators out the door. We're often, I wasn't a part of the generation. We're often reminded that, Detroit was the arsenal of democracy, right? We sort of retooled really quick to be able to go do some extraordinary things on a global stage. And I think a lot of us who weren't a part of that had a chance to see it and feel a sense of pride and know that General Motors' ingenuity and perseverance and ability to manufacture and the skill sets that we were really proud of could be put on the world stage to help that. So I think that was certainly, a big part of what GM was. Also, really proud of Mary Barra and her commitment to generating awareness around equity issues. I had admittedly the benefit of sort of growing up on both sides of the tracks. And I definitely grew up in a rich, comfortable neighborhood. But my family business, I'm proud to say, my great-grandfather invented Coney dogs. So chili mustard onions on a hot dog. And the store, the restaurant that my dad, ran for 50 plus years was in downtown Detroit. And like any good parent who's got a tool like that, I grew up in it, and I grew up, sorting beer bottles and washing dishes and serving governors all the way to folks who we knew lived on the street. And, my brother and I used to sneak hot dogs to those guys. I still know a bunch of their names, and my dad didn't like giving away food, but we knew it was important. So I had an appreciation for, again, living in what, Llewelyn was talking about, the privilege and the ability to sort of take the skills that were given to me and run with them. And I don't think I've ever dropped those skills. But at the same time, you got to recognize there's millions and millions of people who don't have opportunity. And I totally agree. It starts with education. And I also appreciated, Mary stepping up and acknowledging that there's a lot of gaps in our knowledge and awareness. And there's conversations that even at GM, we've been uncomfortable having about diversity and equity and what that means to our teams, both at a GM level, but also my team. Like, how do I make my team better and bring inclusive thoughts and an inclusive way of thinking about it? And Certainly, it also touches even closer to home because of electric vehicles, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, which is, on the surface, these are expensive toys, if you will, but we have to turn them into tools that all communities can leverage and adopt. And so as we deploy infrastructure, as we think about these technologies, we have to have a pretty good awareness that this can't be just for certain community members, that we have to make these accessible to all, whether it's somebody riding a bus, somebody who's buying a car and driving it to work every day, or even don't have the ability to buy a car. How do we do those things? So, and then, obviously my work with Maven and mobility has certainly shaped my thinking there. So, and then again, that same intensity in terms of what's happened over the last few months with GM and a lot of the announcements we've made on education and or electrification, and bringing that and bringing really cool product like the Hummer EV to market, to really help the iconic view of like, man, that is cool. And I'll call it, the Lamborghini posters of our day, right? For kids of a new generation, so they can see it and be inspired by the technology. But also, again, EVs for all, right? How do we bring out the Bolt EV, make it accessible, and make sure infrastructure and those sorts of things are there. So it's for us, it's been a fairly intense year, like everybody else. Certainly, I think GM has been in the middle of the COVID discussions with what we've done on those things, and really leaning in on this equity conversation and having a really truthful, open conversation around it. Mary is really, really good, and our company's really good at not just saying something, but really trying to turn what we're saying into action. And so she doesn't let us forget about things like the ignition switch, and the fact that we could have done better there, and these types of things like inclusion. She's not going to let that go. She wants to see action, and she wants to see teams deliver it. And electrification, same thing, deliver. We got to go out and be the world's best automaker when it comes to EVs. How do we do that? And we got a bogey, and let's go get it. So it's been a fun year. It's certainly been from my little secondary office at home, nonetheless. So
I have a question, John, Alex. And my question is, what have hot dogs got to do with the automobile industry? Lee Iacocca's father ran a hot dog stand in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I used to have a single-engine airplane, and my friends and I would fly up there to have hot dogs because they were very good. It was called Iacocca's. And I just wondered what this connection between hot dogs and the automobile industry is.
So to tell the story real quick, obviously, certainly a sense of pride, but, my great-grandfather, given the last name, came from Greece right around the turn of the 1900s. And, in that sense, where were jobs being created, which was Detroit, right? I mean, there's no single place out there, then a lot of these immigrants are like, hey, let's go there. So he went there, like many, didn't have skill sets, could barely speak English. And so he turned to things like he could do, one of which was began shining shoes and doing that. But then sort of graduated to selling hot dogs, and had sort of a hot dog stand with a chili cart next to it. And it's a little bit of mythology now after 100 plus years, but as the story goes is, somebody came along and said, hey, can you put the chili on the hot dog? And now you have sort of chili dogs. And we grew up in, if you know downtown Detroit, it's city center. It's American and Lafayette, Coney Island. So there's my plug, I guess, for the fam business. And if you watch, food shows or travel channels, there's a neat sort of expression of two storefronts that were brothers that grew up, and now over time, there's a little bit of fun competitive tension there about which one do you like. If you're in Detroit, you're either a Lafayette person or an American person. It's that simple. So, which is not unlike Philadelphia, not unlike New York on your pizzas and your cheesesteaks and those sorts of things. But, we grew up in the shadow, and I think, sort of dovetail what you said is those were the times where hard work paid off, right? You knew if you worked hard, you had an opportunity, and you had an opportunity to make things happen. And I grew up in that environment, with whether it was my dad telling me about the stories of my great grandfather or whatnot. And I really do hope we find ways to unfold and allow for that innovation plus hard work to be coupled with some opportunity to make people believe that they can come out of these things. I just saw a really powerful Wolverine, Jalen Rose, say something, and it's a good reminder, which is, for a lot of folks, it was you either sold drugs or you picked up basketball. And, to have a mentality like that, to think that you only have two choices in life, I didn't grow up with that frame of mind, and it's hard for me to really appreciate it, but I can appreciate it. And so we need to do things like, hey, you can do a lot of things, whether it's sell Coney dogs, make EVs, hopefully not sell drugs, but, do well at basketball. But it really comes down to opportunity. And I try to bring that at least to GM. I'm an entrepreneur within GM and really help reshape and have a sense of obligation and responsibility to what I'm doing. So I don't know about hot dogs, but it's not lost on me how blessed I am to have that story, to have that experience, and then be able to use that experience to make what we're doing at GM better.
Yeah, well, Alex, I have a question. And as an iconic firm, and congratulations as rebuilding GM in the tradition of the future. But as you sit around a boardroom and you think about the future of the car industry, when you look at the drones, you look at EVs, you look at how people might say, we're not going to purchase cars anymore. We're going to rent cars on every corner. It seems like to me, when we put the automobile in the tradition of movement, forget about that it's an automobile. Here in Austin, Texas, people are working on flying cars or drones that literally fly. And I know that General Motors was doing before the 1970s, and then we had all kind of competition to come in from Germany, of course, and Japan and other countries. So how do you see the totality of transportation, and where does the automobile fit, or even does it fit at all, as you guys begin to think about the future? When I say doesn't fit at all, I mean, for example, will we have car dealerships in the future? So we're bringing Tesla here, for example, to Austin, Texas, and they don't do car dealerships. They want to go from factory to the home. What would this do to the whole supply chain that General Motors have? And you need to bring back the Impala too, because that was one of my favorite cars. I'm really mad about that. So tell me what we're going to do about the. What's your vision of the movement of people in a box with wheels on it?
Yeah, it's so as Andreas was saying, my previous life was Maven Smart Cities chief, and what we did at Maven was we created a mobility brand, right? And what we were doing, to your point, some car sharings, and we were also doing some rentals into the gig economy. Now, it didn't work out, but my job in there was to sort of think about the question that you're raising. And so there's some layers to those answers. So just, bear with me on sort of working through and thinking through these things. So one is, I think it's probably fair to say the personal automobile is not going away tomorrow, right? There's certainly that role. I also think automakers, and I'll say it a little different. I have a personal responsibility. I have a sense of personal responsibility about the role that an automaker needs to play in working with alongside the stakeholder base within cities. And so that means, to your point, how it's no longer thinking about, I want to sell you a car and you're going to use a car in this setting. It's, how do I sell a car that fits in that setting from the get-go, right? And it could be a car, it could be any transportation, it could be micromobility, scooters, those sorts of things. I need to be in that setting with a group of stakeholders, helping to define and work with what that thing is. And that, it's, again, I'm not taking it from a purist point of view, I'm saying that sometimes cities say, hey, we want to close down our streets, right? Because that's how we think we want to think, or hey, we want to lean in on transit. We have to be in the middle of that conversation, both to affect it, given our working knowledge, but also be affected in a design. Now, one of the most profound things that I've took away from my time at Maven was cities are not trying to solve for mobility even. They're not trying to solve for transportation. Those cities, in many respects, are solving for access, whether it's access to healthcare, whether it's access to jobs. We have to start sort of at that very basic, simple building block that I'm city A, and I don't care about your transportation. Now, I care about what your transportation gives me at the end, or gives my residents in this case. And so, that's part of the existential, I think, growth of how do we fit ourselves into that ecosystem, and how do we present ourselves as somebody who can present mobility options to cities and their stakeholders in such a way that fit the way those cities and those stakeholders want those mobility options to be. So now we also got to make money. And to be blunt, and not in a really selfish way, but for us to continue down these paths, or for these paths to work, they have to be sustainably financially sustainable. So it's the way I've thought about it is we better be prepared, right? We better be well prepared across a spectrum of mobility options, and be able to understand how consumers interact with those options and deliver on a better experience over time. Again, back to where I started. That means the personal automobile is going to stick around. Is sharing mobility going to play an increasing role in it? Well, it already has, right? We have transit and other things. It might be personal mobility through, to your point, of car sharing options. But we also got to do a better job at lowering some of our footprint and increasing our scale through transit options, whether it's mass transit or other types of options. And then start to think about, what's I'm passionate about is how do we keep that clean, right? How do we reduce the footprint of those options, whether it's their safety functions, whether they're more environmentally safe options, so electrifying that transit and put it into place. So, obviously teams like the Cruise automation team is looking at some of those new mobility options, talked about delivery, how does that fit into that space? But we have to do a good job at, in this innovation world, making thoughtful bets in some of these things. And it also includes things that I'll call them might not look like mobility options, payment platforms, right? How do you make seamless payment platforms for people who can have a credit card, for example, and who don't have a credit card, who have a cell phone or smartphone, who don't have a smartphone, right? We have to think very dynamically about the role that transportation mobility plays, and how do we develop a suite of technologies to manage that. So yeah, it's a long answer. It's a fairly convoluted answer. I appreciate it, but it just, I think it gives you a flavor of how do all these different pieces play into some of our thinking as we move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Alex about the sort of mechanics of the future of the electric car. Are we going to see induction charging, which will make them more flexible, get rid of the wire? Are we going to see removable batteries so that we renew the vehicle by simply changing the battery rather than conventional refueling? And have you looked at what is the future of the gas station when we're all running around in electric vehicles which don't need oil changes or half of the service that internal combustion engines need?
Yeah, let's start with the last one first, because the beautiful thing about EVs is you can charge usually out of your house, right? Most of us have a garage. Not everybody. Those that live in apartments and other things, we have to think about solutions. But for a big portion of us who live out of homes, man, what a really convenient opportunity, right? You don't got to go 15 minutes out of your way once a week to a gas station. I like to tell the story that my wife reminded me. She's like, I don't have to be in heels in the snow at a stinky gas station anymore. And when she put it in that term to me, I was like, oh, hey, yeah, I got to stop thinking like an engineer now and start thinking like it. And the benefit of charging at home is much like your cell phone, right? You sort of plug it in. You don't have to think about it. You wake up to a full charge most of the time, and you sort of go about your day. So it really is that is our future gas station for the most part, right? And it's going to be out of your house. Now, it doesn't solve all of our problems. And we do need a couple variables. If I can get workplace charging, right? If I can get charging at work where you work, I know it's hard for some of us these days to think about it, but there's a lot of folks who are going into jobs these days, including all of the folks that are manufacturing plants. And having access to charging at work, if you don't at home, creates a huge benefit. It also creates the benefit of things like, hey, that's when solar power is available at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we can couple things like workplace charging and solar power to really take advantage of those opportunities. And then, I think about public charging in sort of 2 forms. One, as I go about my day, right? I got to go to the grocery store. I got to do all those things. Can I get access to charging there? And then what usually garners just about all the headlines is the smallest fraction is I got to go between Detroit and Chicago, right? I got to make that long distance trip, which everybody loves talking about, but happens so infrequently that it's the least sort of important role. So on the about town, the idea is, how do we leverage where the car already is? If you're going to the grocery store and you're already spending 45 minutes there, let me put charging there because it's going to simplify your experience. You don't have to go 15 minutes out of your way to do anything. You just go and do what you're doing. You plug in and you take advantage of it. So another great opportunity for people living in apartments, or if I don't have access to charging on a daily basis, I can do that. And then the last sort of chunk of the pie is really the sense of I'm making that long distance trip. I do see a role. Some of those gas stations out there are in really good spots. They have attendants, they have safety and security and lights and those sorts of things. I do see maybe not every gas station, but many that are thoughtful and good location, have good amenities. I can go get good coffee. I can spend 10 minutes there, maybe sitting down doing something else. I do see a role for those gas station owners, and we're talking to a lot of those associations on how to build those opportunities for them, particularly the long distance drives too. The rest stop type of places. I do see you're going to probably see more and more charging show up there. So certainly a strong opportunity.
So Alex, I want to get your brain on something. We track innovation on telecom, primarily 5G and IoT. We track innovation on smart cities. We track innovation on energy. We track innovation on smart buildings. When you look at GM strikes me as a company that has OnStar. It's moving itself into an EV reality. It's a company that has an incredible long-term pedigree, has an amazing supply chain, has an amazing scale. It's a company that has a phenomenal balance sheet. You do financing for vehicles, so no reason why there shouldn't be a GM Venmo app to buy whatever for cars or whatever. Does GM see itself? I'm curious about this. Does GM see itself as a car company? Does it see itself as a transportation company? Does it see itself as a technology company, or all of the above? Does it see itself as an energy company?
I think it's all of the above, with the caveat is, I'll be tongue in cheek. There's probably a little bit of a midlife crisis going on, right? You're sort of growing up and you're recognizing we do have a variety of skill sets to what you just described. So certainly we're really awesome at manufacturing, and we could scale anything quick and build anything appropriately. So we continue to prove that time and time again, and we'll continue to leverage it. I do think we're, a very strong, you say energy company, transportation company. It's sort of, we have relationships, very strong, deep relationships across a very broad consumer base, right? And we can speak to consumers, whether they're Corvette consumers or they're Chevy Trax, Buick, and so I think we have an ability to use that, customer base more as a platform. Yeah. And think about, different services, different opportunities to partner. A lot of the theme that we also have is partnering with others to facilitate a better customer experience. I do see us as we feel like we do have a big role in energy services generally, right? We, our commitment to RE100, renewable energy, 100% of our work in 2040 in the United States, 2050 globally. That means we're working with, wind farms, solar installations. We're working with utility companies to decarbonize our energy streams. And we recognize, wow, we have tools that we can work with other folks to do the same thing, whether it's suppliers or customers or those sorts of things. To your point, we're connected. We've had 20 years of OnStar, and we can engage consumers in a much more dynamic way than we ever have. An example just on how let's take our EVs and let's charge them at the right time, right? It's good for the grid. It's good for the environment. Oh, by the way, when you do that, you save money. So it's good for our customers, right? So we have tools in our toolbox that I really do think, I said it tongue in cheek, we're in a midlife crisis. I don't think it's that. We recognize we have a breadth of opportunities that we can go build. Admittedly, I'm a little bit of a historian on GM, and there's not a lot of people out there that know things like GM brought essentially refrigerators into everybody's house back in the day, right? We had a pretty eccentric CEO who went and bought Frigidaire and found a way to manufacture it in a much different way. And again, maybe I'm a little bit of a historian, but that's inspiring to me, that thinking about it differently. Now, we have very thoughtful leadership who says, Alex, if you're going to do that stuff, you better justify it. It better be good for our customers and first and foremost, and how do we create business opportunities around that for ourselves? So I do think we have a little bit of latitude to think much more freely than we have before, thinking of ourselves as an automobile company or a manufacturing company, maybe even just 10 years ago.
Good. Let me make one plug real quick. I happen to be the owner of a Stingray 2015 C7. I drive it every day. In my opinion, I haven't ridden the C8, but it's got to be the best car ever made. Gives me 50 miles to the gallon. It's an amazing vehicle. Anyway, and I get to race to work every day. I love it. John, what are your thoughts on GM strikes me as a company that has so many business models. Of all the big companies, it's in the telecom business, it's in the energy business, it's in the manufacturing business, it's in the transportation business, it's in the customer experience business. What would you say if they were your client? What would be your thoughts, John?
Well, first of all, GM understands that profit is a cost to compete in the future. It's the old Schumpeter saying. And therefore, when you have profit, you can be anything you want to be. You can also be a bank if you would like to be a bank. So I think with the different business models and the way things are really coming out now, then what's a bank now? It's a platform. Is it State Farm? They have a bank. Is it Chase? It is a bank. But Chase is doing other things based on the platform. So what GM is doing then, it is really, really creating profit centers in dynamic business models. And when you do that, then you have so many profit centers, but right now the technology allows the profit centers to converge. So I was one of State Farm's major consultants for 18 years, and we did a bank because we had the profits to do a bank. The profits were utilized not to create, as Sears did, a big building in Chicago, but rather to invest in the future. Now, in looking at GM and EVs, I think their business model will have one hurdle. I'm not sure if we have the grid to support the vision of EVs right now. I'm not sure, and I'm not an Andreas Carvallo, that's an expert on the grid. But I know one thing, when you plug in your car, and by the way, he loved his car so much, he came by the house, he showed it to him, and I drive an LC 500 Lexus, which I think is a pretty nice car. Well, my question to Alex is this: is the grid ready for your vision?
It is. So a couple variants of that answer. Nobody asked that about air conditioners. Nobody asked that about, growing footprints. And the grid has always sort of leveled itself up to meet the needs of what they're doing. So utilities in many respects have an obligation by definition in their legal construct to serve. So there's that piece of it. Well, so let's park that in a different, Alex, you're full of it. It's easy answer. There's a handful of studies, actually recent ones, including the Department of Energy, that essentially says, unmanaged charging, meaning we don't do anything to control when that charging is happening. We sort of have the ability to get about, 30 to 40 million electric vehicles on the road without any additional sort of deployment of additional resources. Now, let me caveat it, because they did too, and it's true. That's not to say local transformers and some of that investment is not going to happen. We're certainly going to be impacted by that, and your local utility, Austin Energy, and is going to have to do some investment. That is not necessarily always attributable to the EV, right? If you have a transformer that's already sort of loaded to its max, and then all of a sudden EV comes along, it's hard to say, well, we had to upgrade that transformer just because of the EV. If it was, another home or anything like that, it was certainly there. So generally speaking, the grid at a very high level is balanced enough to add in, tens of millions of vehicles. Now, what we didn't talk about is if we start to manage that charging, right? We start to charge in a more efficient way. And so let's leverage GM's ingenuity here and connectivity. I got a car, it's plugged in. I know when it's good for the grid. I can work with Austin Energy and others, National Grid, whomever, to basically say, hey, when is the right time to charge? And we can do this in a very seamless way for consumers. So in California, duck curve style, right? Charging, they have an overabundance of electricity at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We can start charging there, particularly if they have workplace charging. In most, other traditional sort of resource states, we're talking about we got to turn that car on at 2 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night, not when you get home and plug in at 6 p.m. So when you start to do that, you actually start to leverage the ability of the grid to be much more efficient. And usually you're also pulling in some greener electrons. So the short answer is, yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, we're in a really decent place to be able to get millions of vehicles out the door. It's incumbent on people like me to work with your utilities to make that even easier, right? Much more seamless. And so, my team's vision is, how do we do that for a customer in I'll call it a set and forget way, where I can just say, hey, what do you want when you wake up in the morning? You plugged in, do you want 200 miles? Your car might be 300 miles, but you don't care. If that's the case, let me do that. And then we can get, Llewelyn, you were talking about innovations. We could start to think about bidirectional charging, right? Bidirectional flow of electrons. And we can use now those EVs as a balancing resource, depending on the time of day. We can create value for the grid, usually value for the customer at the same time. So that's a scale issue. And I'm not going to paint that's a tomorrow thing, but certainly as we continue to grow the grid, so we know there's enough room for 10, 20, 30 million vehicles. As we grow that, we layer on this innovation and this technology to make it even seamless and make it even better for customers. The beautiful thing about EVs is you can charge them when you really want. It's somewhat of a discretionary load. So as more renewables come online, which we know states are doing, now we can leverage that overall. So yeah. I'm pretty confident we have the ability to execute on that one.
Let me follow up quickly. I think that, given that the combustion engine might have, a jillion parts, 8,000 parts, EV will have, less than 1% of that. I think a lot of companies will get into the market. I think a lot of local companies will get into the market. That is, people who are doing different things will start to make automobiles. Even now, there's a company that would take Alex's wonderful, wonderful car that he has and making an EV overnight. So my question is, how do you perceive the competition that's going to evolve in any new technology like this, whether it's computers? When Micah started Dell Computers, there were lots of people trying to do what he's doing.
Yeah.
How many new car companies do you predict will evolve in America to do that?
Yeah.
As you take your brand from the great combustion engine that Alex, that Andreas loves so well, to the EV?
I don't know. I mean, the beautiful thing, again, I'm a historian of this world. So, 100 years ago, this is what's happening, right? It's sort of a frontier land. There are a lot of folks, they were individuals at the time tinkering in their shops. Now it's a lot of investment funds looking for opportunities in this. I sort of welcome it. My sense is having new players come into this really helps advance consumers in the long run. And regardless of where we sort of bleed ourselves out in that competitive fight, I think it's good. So I don't know how many, but we're certainly in a space, in my estimation, my personal view is there's a lot of hype going on, right? It's not a technology hype. It's like, hey, we all can be car companies hype. Certainly there's a lot of folks who are doing some really neat things and who are pushing the industry and innovation within the industry forward, particularly on electrification front. So I don't know how many. I'm sure there's going to be more. I sort of like it. I like competition. I like the fact that I also like the team we have to compete, and it pushes us a little bit more. It causes us to think a little bit differently, especially for a 100-year-old company. It's important to get uncomfortable, to think about how we fit in it. So I think we're still probably in a few years of more players coming in and more disruption overall before it starts to sort of settle itself down and maybe another new innovation or technology comes along.
Okay, thank you. Good answer.
Llewelyn?
I have a question, and that is recycling. The automobile of today is primarily made of steel, and it recycles amazingly well. People don't think of steel as a recyclable material, but it is. In fact, even the steel cycle requires scrap in incentivizing recycling of steel. Are we going to see dependence on more new materials with electric vehicles? And of course, there's the open issue about the battery. Is it always going to be a lithium-ion battery? Is that recyclable, or are they going to jam up our landfills in a rather toxic way?
Great question, and certainly one top of mind, who sort of cares about the impact of what they're buying. So what I can say, in some of it's sort of competitive, some of it's not, is you do see a move towards the batteries themselves. So the stuff on the batteries is valuable. We know that. Extracting that value is obviously one of those challenges. And I would say over the last few years, you're starting to see more and more of a market pull for those materials, right? And you're just like in the 50s, I think as the story goes, cars weren't being recycled. And then a few entrepreneurs came along with a big mining machine and said, wow, we can use this mining machine to tear apart a car and start to recycle it. I think, again, we're at that space where there's enough longevity of how we're looking at the technologies within these batteries and enough value that we can say, all right, there's going to be industries that start to grow up around it. Now, keep in mind, the goal is to keep that battery in that car as long as possible. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. As great as internal combustion engines are these days, lasting hundreds of thousands of miles, an EV battery plus its motor is looking like it's going to be able to last even longer. So my recommendation to anybody who's getting into these tech cars, get leather, because those cloth seats are probably going to wear out. So first and foremost is keep that battery in that car as long as possible. And I think you're going to see that. And I also think there's going to be innovative ways. batteries that don't have as much, capacity anymore, that's going to be your kid's car, right? And those sorts of things. But I do see more and more of a market pull for the recycling issues that you're talking about, and we're certainly in the middle of those conversations with different partners.
Alex, I was reading today's news from the week that Amazon has a new business that I didn't know about. It's called Zoox, and they're promoting something called the robo-taxi. So Amazon is in the autonomous business. Google's in the autonomous business. Intel bought Mobileye in the autonomous business. Tesla is in the autonomous business, of course. But I hear that GM has the best technology. How important is autonomous to the future of electrification of transportation?
I think it's important to transportation, period, right? I mean, certainly the goal overall is more autonomous options, bringing down that cost per mile, particularly in places like we've talked about where there are drivers and the need to move, goods and people around. So certainly autonomous technology will continue, particularly in the urban setting, but as it grows broader and broader. We've talked about our commitment to, hey, we do think this is urban settings. We don't think this is an individual person's technology in the near term. So and then the value of that is electrifying it, right? What I just said, right? How do I keep that piece of technology on the road as long as I possibly can? Electrification helps. How do I make sure its impact is low? Electrification art. How do I make sure the customers inside that vehicle have as minimal impact as well, because it's the road noise and sounds and those sorts of things, that part of the experience. So I do see autonomous vehicles, certainly over time, continuing to play in a more and more important role, particularly in urban centers, but certainly over time. Now, I don't know if like the horse ended up on the racetrack, will personal driving end up on the racetrack as well in 100 years from now? It seems possible to me, right? In a world where we value our time and driving isn't good, meaning it's taking away from that. But I also know there's a lot of people who just don't have a lot of comfort with that right now, and certainly will grow to build their confidence overall.
Yeah,
Alex, in the great state of Texas, we treat the car like a horse.
Yeah, I understood that.
It's interesting getting in our car and having a lot of parking spaces. We have a city council that's trying to force us to not take cars downtown. But our culture is a horse culture, which happens to be an automobile now. So we're not like the people in Delaware and Rhode Island who jump on trains to go. I haven't been on a bus in my life, and I've never been on a train except when I was in Chicago at Northwestern. So we want to keep our freedom to jump on our horse and go wherever we want to go. So we will always welcome GM in the great state of Texas.
Well, and that it sort of goes to my point. Yeah, I appreciate that. But that goes to my point about the role that GM has to play in all of those conversations, right? We have to play a role whether we're in Delaware or we have to play a role whether in Texas. That for us to be relevant, that's really important. To your point, I think we do have to respect, I'll say cultural norms or, local traditions or the way folks look at their technology and the way they interact with it.
So as I see the evolution of technology, Alex, and I see 5G everywhere. I have my new Apple 5G that I love, and I see OnStar and connected vehicles as a key element. I see autonomy as a key element. I see electrification as a key element. And you just mentioned something that triggered this question. I mean, GM is a phenomenal company, full of innovation, full of smart people like you. Why wouldn't GM be the best company to produce the drone that delivers human beings back and forth, and ultimately the Jetson vehicle that as he drops everybody, the car flips into a briefcase? Is that coming?
Flying cars, right? That's always been right around the horizon. So, hey, at the end of the day, I do think we have the skill sets to do that, but we also, we got to make choices, right? There's not an unlimited bucket of money sitting to make things and do things and do the development right for success. So on one hand, I think we could have the teams to build those flying cars should we choose to. At the same time, I think the companies is really betting heavily on connectivity, autonomous, electrification, those building blocks that we think will grow into the future. So I think those are all good, really safe bets right now. If Warren Buffett wants to give Mary his fortune to go do that, maybe that's a different conversation that we could facilitate on the side. But my job is just get stuff done. So I don't know if I'm going to be in the middle of that negotiation. So
yeah, Llewelyn, any parting thoughts? Any last question?
Well, I think it's a huge change and a very exciting. I'm so sorry to hear John has never been on a train. There are such wonderful adventures, especially on overnight trains, that you've had such deprivation in your life, John, affects me enormously. I hope that you get the opportunity to travel on a train before you get much older, especially a very good train in Europe or somewhere else. And you mean all that time in Japan, you never went on the bullet train?
Well, yes, I mean, as a data kind of activity, but I prefer,
Oh, you didn't commute by train or something like that.
a private jet these days.
Oh, well, I take back then. You did not make it clear that you were a partial train traveler.
A partial train traveler.
Suggested an animosity to public transportation.
Yeah.
I do tell you, the thing about the automobile is when you get into it, you've got your own SH, etc. It's your place, your home already. Whereas that is not true of public transportation buses, but I happen to like public transportation. I like looking at people and seeing what's going on and speculating about them. But I think that the automobile has huge appeal because it's your own stuff and it's your own timetable. If the traffic's not too bad. If the traffic gets bad, you lose the timetable advantage. And I'm terribly excited about electric vehicles. I used to watch the lead acid battery vehicles that delivered parcels for Harrods department store in London for a very long time. I don't think it was necessarily economic, but the advertising was fabulous. These green things that moved in a very sedately way down the street. People love to have these delivery vehicles come to their houses because it suggests that they had a lot of money and taste, etc. So more power to you, Alex. Excellent.
Thanks.
John, any parting thoughts?
I think it's a wonderful thing to really see a great American company reinvent itself. I think that if you look at the history of business in America, so many great companies have not reinvented themselves. From Kodak to Sears and Roebuck, what a breath of fresh air to see an iconic 100-year-old company, much like Toyota in Japan, sit down and reinvent itself along lines of new technology. So that's exciting. It's a great case study, and I will be sure to mention it in my classes in the future.
Alex, one last thing. You call yourself an entrepreneur within GM. So I take it that the culture has changed over the last 10, 15 years. I take it that Mary Barra gets the credit for changing or accelerating that change as she went from being an engineer and running products to being the CEO of the company. What would you say is the culture today? Is it a learning culture? Is it a fail fast culture? What goes on inside GM? And obviously big companies have committees and committees and committees, but what would you say is the difference today, understanding all the things that we have discussed and sort of where the culture was 20, 30 years ago? What is it looking like?
Yeah, and I was interesting because I was like one of the young guys coming in at a time when things are going down, and all my friends, as I was getting my MBA, were like, why are you going to GM? Now they're all calling, going, hey, got any roles over at GM? So I think there's sort of two senses. There is the wholehearted sense of responsibility. So do it safely, put out the best product possible. And make sure everybody's in the room to do that. So I think that's one of the key parts of the culture. And so I'll call it a safety culture, but that's to me an engineering culture, right? How do we do it and do it the right way? Then the periphery, right? The electrification, mobility, innovation stuff. I think there is, I wouldn't call it a true fail fast, but it's certainly how do we get ourselves uncomfortable? How do we bring new ideas to the table, test them, understand, bring it, and then if we do see, that hey, they're not working, be comfortable saying, hey, they're not, or let's pivot, let's adjust, let's move it on. So I think there's sort of, we're a little bit of, I'll use cheesy words, best of the both worlds, right? The old GM that was slow, but slow for a good reason, for safety and engineering purposes. And I think there's now a lot of us who have bankruptcy and that embarrassment burnt in the back of our head that we don't want to be a part of it and we don't want to contribute to any future part of that. So we better innovate and we better think differently. And when we are in a room with executives, we better speak up if we believe it. And if we do, and we have a good plan, most of the time those executives support us and we bring that innovation to market.
Yeah, fantastic, Alex. Great answer. Thank you for being with us. The time's up. Unfortunately, we're going to ask John to play a guitar. Alex, it's delightful to have you. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas. May your days be bright. From now on, your troubles will be out of sight. And have yourself a merry little Christmas. Make the Yuletide gay. From now on, your troubles will be miles away. Here we are, as in olden days, happy golden days of yore. Faithful friends who are dear to us, they gather near to us once more. Through the years, we'll always be together, if the fates allow. Hang a shining star up on your highest bough, and have yourself a merry little Christmas. Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Very nice to be with you.
All right, Alex, I'll talk to you later through email.